The latest about Shania Twain is breaking the headlines. I always loved to sing. I had a great passion for music, for singing, and for writing. Shania Twain has sold more than 100 million records and played the biggest arenas in the world. But in the summer of 2026, she walked into a tiny London pub that holds barely 200 people and did something nobody expected. Only weeks later, she was opening for Harry Styles at Wembley Stadium in front of tens of thousands of fans a night. What pushed a woman turning 60 to suddenly shrink her entire world down to a room the size of someone's living room? And what was hidden inside those unreleased songs she played that night? The truth behind this strange decision is finally coming out. Eileen Regina Twain was born on August 28, 1965, in Windsor, Ontario. But the life that shaped her began after her parents split. Her mother took her and her sisters north to Timmins, a mining town that felt cold in every sense. In the 1970s, it was a small place with only a few tens of thousands of people, and once the family arrived there, the past seemed to disappear. Her biological father faded so completely from her life that she later said she could barely remember him. Then her mother married Jerry Twain, an Ojibwe man who adopted the girls and quietly replaced Edwards with Twain on school and medical records before Eileen turned 10. That simple change gave her the name the world would one day know as Shania Twain. Life in Timmins was hard in ways that stayed with her for years. Winters in northern Ontario dropped brutally low, and inside the house, things were often just as harsh. Money was never steady. Bills went unpaid. Food had to be stretched. She remembered opening the fridge and finding almost nothing there. Some nights there were only boiled potatoes or a bowl of oatmeal. At the same time, her stepfather had a difficult temper and her mother struggled with depression, so the home that should have felt safe often felt tense and uncertain. As a child, she sometimes slept in her clothes so she could gather the younger children and leave fast if things got out of hand. Then she would go to school and act like everything was normal. That pressure pushed her to grow up early, helping cut firewood in the freezing bush and joining hunting trips because buying meat at a store was often out of reach. Even before music changed her life, survival had already taught her discipline and quiet endurance. Then music entered the picture and gave all that pain somewhere to go. She was drawn to songs almost as soon as she could speak, memorizing country radio by age 3, playing an old guitar by 8, and filling notebooks with lyrics by 10. In the classroom she was shy and held back. Yet when she stood up to sing, the same girl who barely spoke could suddenly command the whole room. Her mother saw quickly that singing could become income, so while most children her age were asleep, young Eileen was taken into smoky bars around Timmins after midnight, earning around $20 for an hour-long set for minors and drinkers. At 14 she appeared on CBC's The Tommy Hunter Show, proving she could handle a national audience, before returning right back to the local bars. By 1985, around age 19, she moved to Toronto with a guitar case that doubled as luggage and only a few $100s. She worked temp jobs and retail shifts by day and sang in small clubs by night. Then her life broke open. On November 1, 1987, her mother and stepfather died in a car crash near Timmins. She was only 22, and grief instantly became responsibility. She became guardian to her younger siblings, and the dream that had carried her to Toronto had to wait. That need led her to Deerhurst Resort in Huntsville, Ontario, in 1988, where steady pay and staff housing mattered more than glamour. She performed 2 shows a night, 6 nights a week, while handling bills and school matters for her siblings during the day. The job sharpened her into a professional who could hold a room with precision. She kept writing songs and recording demo tapes, mailing them to Nashville. That long shot worked. Mercury Nashville signed her in 1991, and her self-titled debut album arrived in the United States in April 1993. The record did modest business at first, but its music videos gave her a striking television presence that eventually reached producer Robert John Mutt Lang. They began writing together, married in December 1993, and out of that partnership came The Woman in Me, released in February 1995, which eventually reached diamond status. Come On Over followed in November 1997 and grew into one of the best-selling albums of the decade, and Up arrived in 2002 as a 3-disc project that still opened at number 1. By 2003 she had sold more than 75 million albums worldwide, and from the outside it felt like the run would never slow. Then the noise stopped. After 2004, there was no new studio album of original material for 15 years. Behind that silence, her body was already turning against her. She later said a tick bite led to Lyme disease, which damaged the nerves affecting her voice and caused a condition that made her vocal cords spasm uncontrollably. For years she couldn't reliably project her voice at all. To the public it looked like a hiatus. To her, it felt like losing the one thing that had carried her out of poverty and fear. In 2011 she brought that pain into public view with her memoir, followed days later by a docuseries that tracked her through vocal rehabilitation and emotional reckoning. That same period, her marriage to Lang collapsed after she learned of an affair involving a close friend and assistant, and the divorce was finalized in Switzerland in 2010. She went on to marry Frederick Thibault, the former husband of the woman involved, in Puerto Rico in January 2011. Tabloids loved the tidy, dramatic shape of the story, but her own account was simpler: two hurt people finding safety in each other. Slowly, the voice came back through years of therapy and eventual surgery. She tested her rebuilt instrument through a Las Vegas residency that ended in December 2014, then returned with the album Now in September 2017, which debuted at number 1 and made her the first female country artist with 3 consecutive chart-topping albums. A tour followed, a second Vegas residency opened in 2019, and a 2022 Netflix documentary retraced the whole arc from the bars of Timmins to global stardom and back. In 2023 she released Queen of Me, her first album with Republic Nashville, toured behind it, and leaned hard into a public message of self-acceptance after menopause, right down to reworking old stage costumes into new looks. That spirit carried straight into 2026, and this is where the story turns into genuine breaking news. On May 13, she released Dirty Rosie as a digital-only single, her first lead single in more than 6 years and the opening move of a new album cycle. Site index equals 7-1. The song arrives through Republic Nashville as the lead track from Little Miss Twain, her 7th studio album. Site rather than aiming for polished modern country radio, the track leans rough and loud, with hard guitars and bar band drums that echo the smoky Ontario bars she played long before fame found her. The album itself was confirmed for release on July 24, and Twain has been unusually direct about how personal it is. Site index equals 7-1. She has described the record as pulling from her teenage years, her roots, and the rock and R&B she loved growing up, filtered through a western twang that never quite matched the snowmobile ambush reality of her actual childhood. Site in a separate interview, she went further, calling the album Site index equals 3-1 a reflection of her childhood and the environment she grew up in. Site, and noting that turning 60 felt like something worth celebrating after everything it took to get here. She has said this is the first time she's shared that origin story with fans in quite this way. Another recent profile filled in the texture of that influence list further, naming Motown girl groups, Dolly Parton, soft rock radio staples, and gospel-tinged soul as the sound she absorbed as a kid singing for tips, long before Nashville ever heard her name. The title track itself followed on June 26, giving fans a second preview ahead of the full album. And the touring calendar around all of this has been just as busy. Twain is currently opening all 12 of Harry Styles' Wembley Stadium shows, a run that began June 12 and continues through July 4, each night drawing tens of thousands of fans. In a Rolling Stone conversation about the pairing, she recounted how Styles first found her music through his mother, and how he told her he'd thought of her as a defining artist ever since. From Wembley, the schedule keeps moving outward, with a stop at Thomond Park and Limerick and further European dates layered around the new album's rollout. And then there's the pub. Before any of the Wembley nights or the title track release, she quietly booked the Shacklewell Arms, a small venue in Dalston with room for only around 200 people, for a one-night show fans could only access through a lottery. Photos from that night show her performing inches from the crowd, working through Dirty Rosie and previewing unreleased Little Miss Twain material in a room built for indie club shows, not a woman who has sold more than 100 million records. Reports describe a second, quieter appearance at the same venue not long after, treated almost like a rehearsal in front of an audience, before she stepped onto the Wembley stage days later in front of crowds numbering in the tens of thousands a night. In under a month, she moved from a room holding a couple hundred people to a run of shows facing well over 1 million ticket holders combined. Even away from the album, she's stayed visible in ways that keep surfacing in entertainment coverage. A recent feature timed to come on Over's upcoming 30th anniversary caught her mid-photoshoot, dressed down in a baseball cap and sneakers, cracking jokes about a decades-old lyric that name-checked Brad Pitt and confirming, almost gleefully, that the two have still never actually met. It's a small detail, but it captures something about where she is right now: still funny, still sharp, still willing to poke at her own mythology instead of guarding it. That same feature also circled back to the roots she keeps returning to on the new record. She talked about growing up nowhere near a horse, dreaming instead about a Western lifestyle she'd only ever seen in movies and on record sleeves, getting around her actual hometown on a snowmobile instead. It's a small, almost throwaway detail, but it lines up with everything Little Miss Twain seems to be built around: the gap between the life she imagined as a kid in Timmins and the life she was actually living. That gap is exactly what she says she's trying to close with this album, folding the fantasy and the reality into the same songs instead of keeping them separate the way her earlier records often did. It also explains why the choice of a 200-seat pub for a preview show made so much sense once the details came out. A stadium tour is built to project a legend outward to as many people as possible. A room the size of the Shacklewell Arms does the opposite, forcing every lyric to land at close range with no screen or distance to soften it. For an album she has repeatedly called her most autobiographical work, built out of childhood poverty and the years she spent singing in bars as a kid, that kind of proximity isn't a gimmick. It mirrors the very bars she once sang in as a child. Only after that did she carry the same songs toward stadium-sized crowds, first alongside Styles at Wembley and then across the touring calendar, still filling in around the album's July release. Seen together, these last few months form a much deeper arc than a simple comeback. She has already spent years rebuilding a damaged voice, surviving a very public divorce, and proving herself again through Vegas residencies and rebuilt tours. Now, instead of staying inside the safest version of her legacy, she's swerved into a rougher single, a deeply personal album pulling from childhood poverty and grief, and a barroom performance that felt almost deliberately out of proportion with her global status. The scale is still there. The fame is still there. 12 nights at Wembley prove that. But the choices feel more human now, shaped less by the pressure to dominate and more by the freedom to follow whatever feels true, whether that's a stadium of 90,000 people or a pub that barely fits 200.